Alright, I wanted to put up a video to go over some of the notes for Emerson's selection that we're reading of nature. Now remember, you don't have to read the whole thing, just read through as far as I tell you to go in the coursework outline. But Emerson here, I don't think it's necessarily that his language is hard to understand. In fact, he has some very beautiful language. But Emerson here reads a little bit like a little more philosophical than some of our other authors, and philosophy sometimes is very challenging. So I just want to give a few of the outlines of his main ideas and try to clarify them a little bit. If they're difficult to understand, don't worry. They're very complex, not in the way that they're stated, but just the bigness of some of the ideas. The nice thing is he breaks it down into basically four categories we'll look at. Before we get into the specific categories, though, he does something very good for us. He defines what he considers nature to be. And sure, a lot of times when we think of nature, we think of trees. And of course, Emerson would, of course, have that idea of nature in mind as far as wildlife. But Emerson defines nature as basically everything that is not me being you or whoever. So everything that's outside of the self, according to Emerson, would be considered nature. One thing interesting that we've already seen in the other selection of Emerson, the letter to an American scholar, or the American scholar, he talks about the importance of new ideas. He's not a fan of the dry bones of the past, but he also talks about here in nature that it's important to remove oneself from other people's ideas. He talks about solitude, how solitude can be a good thing, a beneficial thing for reflection. One interesting thing he says about the teaching ability of nature, he would see nature as the best teacher, period, but he sees that nature is inexhaustible as a teacher, meaning that no matter how much you learn from nature, nature would still have more to teach you. You could never learn everything from nature. An interesting thing, he talks about how nature makes us childlike in the joy that it gives us when we're appreciating it, that we become recharged and youthful and reinvigorated. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of nature, according to Emerson. He also talks about how it's not easy for adults to see nature. And by see nature, I think he means see the genuine aspects of nature, the four that he defines. Sure, you can go out and see stuff, but a lot of times we see nature, he argues adults see nature on the most superficial level, which is the commodity, which we'll get to in just a moment. But the commodity, he argues, not a lot of people have trouble finding commodity appreciation. It's some of the higher level, and he would argue more noble appreciations that some of the adults have difficulty with. A term that you see in here that's going to be very important for a concept important to American literature is called the transparent eye. Now, the transparent eye is something that goes with transcendentalism, and I'm not going to touch too much on transcendentalism here, but you read this selection, or you will read this selection from Emerson. You'll also be reading a selection from Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond. Both of these guys would be seen as keystone figures in the transcendental movement in American literature. And one of the biggest things to know about transcendentalism, religion-wise, would be the idea that God is not found in a building, in a church, but God is actually found in nature, and God is found in the self, and that every person is a part of God. Every person is a piece of God. Now, you were going to read some poetry. We didn't actually, we did the midterm instead, but some of the Whitman poetry really touches on the same idea, the transcendental idea that there's divinity in the individual, and that open communication would be best in nature rather than in a man-made building. Let's talk about the four main ideas as far as the appreciations nature affords us, according to Emerson. The first one, which is the most basic form and probably the easiest to comprehend, is the commodity use of nature. This is basically how we can put nature to our immediate use, our immediate gratification. Things like building shelter. Um, Wood from nature provides the material for us to build shelter. Um, Commodity, though, Emerson argues we should not take advantage of it. For example, he talks about how food in nature would be a commodity. Of course, we eat food for immediate gratification, but he says a man is fed not that he may be fed, but that he may work. So you see here that it's not empty commodity. Commodity, according to Emerson, should be used by man and woman for a greater purpose, for fueling a greater purpose, and not just taken advantage of. A little more complex idea, though, is the idea of beauty, according to Emerson. And beauty, he argues, is a much more noble appreciation than commodity. Therefore, less people are able to appreciate it. This gets a little hippie. This gets a little tricky, but he talks about, but it's also really neat. He talks about how beauty of nature can deify humanity, make them godlike. He talks about how angels and humans share an equality, and that equality is their appreciation and love for the beauty of nature. And he also argues that the beauty of nature, the appreciation of it, is just for its own sake. Like, you don't really necessarily have a definition of why you're appreciating the beauty of nature. You just do for its own sake. Something else that's kind of interesting we've already touched on. He talks about how nature can kind of make humans childlike again in their attitudes, but he argues that the beauty of nature is actually therapeutic, that it can heal mankind or humanity. He talks about art and how humans try to reproduce the beauty found in nature, but of course we're not as successful as the original production, which would be in nature. This is one of the more complicated ideas. He talks about how we actually, humans, have the ability to enhance the beauty of nature by our actions. So it's a relationship. It's kind of a back and forth. We not only appreciate the beauty of nature, but through certain actions, we may also enhance nature's own beauty. He talks about if mankind is able to act nobly in noble action, and humanity is able to act in noble action, that nature sees this nobility, and that nobility allows the beauty of nature to shine even brighter. He uses a few examples. One example you're probably familiar with if you've seen the movie 300. He talks about how the soldiers, the 300 soldiers, you may hear in the background my son. I've got my monitor on, but his mom's watching him. But he talks about the soldiers, the 300, the example that they set, the nobility of it actually enhanced the beauty around them. Last thing about nature is that nature, or the beauty of nature, that nature's beauty can actually be controlled a bit, because nature's beauty will follow humanity through noble action. I'll pause here for time's sake. I'll post a part 2 that'll go over the last 2 parts of Emerson's nature. The last 2 parts we have are going to be language and discipline. So we'll talk about both of those.